Joining us, president and founder of the Eurasia Group and G0 Media, Ian Bremmer. So, Ian, cut through all of that and tell us what's going on.
Well, he said that the talks are over, but he also said that the war is not likely to restart. And this is the problem, is that Trump does not actually have the leverage with the Iranians to get the memorandum of understanding codified into a deal that he would accept. And yet he also does not have the willingness to escalate militarily because he understands the implications that would have both for the U.S. and the global economy and for the security of American allies across the Gulf. And that means that he is frustrated. He's lashing out. He is certainly responding and retaliating in the Iranian hits on several ships over the last 24 or 48 hours. You see targeted strikes from the U.S. against Iranian military targets around the coastline, but nothing else is changing because he doesn't have any other good options. That's why the ceasefire was put in place to begin with. That's why the blockade was concluded. And that's why the war is very unlikely to restart.
So what happens? We are just in this Cold War with Iran?
It's not a Cold War, but a lot of the action now, Katie, is not going to be decided between the Americans and the Iranians. It's going to be decided in Abu Dhabi and in Doha and in Riyadh, in bilateral negotiations between the Iranians and the Gulf states, because they want more influence over how goods transit through the strait. They want to be paid off by the Gulf states with deep pockets. They want their assets, including those in the UAE and in Qatar, to be unfrozen. That has not happened yet. So the Iranians feel like they need to use their leverage to get the outcome that they want. And the outcome they want is more money for their influence over the strait. The leverage they have is knocking out ships that are taking the southern Omani route, which is 75% of the ships that's gone through since the U.S. blockade has been lifted. Most of the ships are not going through the Iranian route. That gives Iran less leverage. Oil prices, until the last 2 days, were going down below 70 a barrel. That gives the Iranians less leverage. When they hit the ships and the Americans hit back and then the prices go up, they have more leverage. So that's the dynamic at play here, Katie. And it's not really about, are we about to enter a new phase of the Americans trying to take out the supreme leader or the regime.
And the prices, by the way, of oil have gone up, as you were just alluding to. Let me ask you about our
voters are going to feel it at the pump in the next week or two. Absolutely. Which
I'm sure is not great for political prospects if you're the party that's forcing them up. All right, let me talk about the our standing overseas. There's been a lot of dust-ups lately. It seemed like our reputation was getting better, at least with the visitors from the World Cup coming here and finding that they actually liked a lot about America that they didn't, otherwise experience: ranch dressing, ribs, Texas, whatnot. But then the president calls the head of FIFA and then suddenly makes us the pariah of the world again regarding soccer. And then he's provoking our allies in unnecessary ways before today, saying he needs a restraining order against the president of Italy. Italy has responded. By the way, she was his biggest ally in Europe. The Italians are responding by basically giving the middle finger to Donald Trump. Look at this headline. Prime Minister Meloni, not President, Prime Minister Meloni. Yep. Look at this headline from an Italian newspaper. It's in Italian. I won't try to pronounce it, but it's a vulgar way to describe Donald Trump. It says Trump is you could say idiot or a-hole. If you're doing the translation on that.
You got to use your hands when you say it, though. You got to translate the Italian.
Yeah, you gotta do this.
Got to sell it.
What's our standing overseas?
Look. Of course, all of the things you mention make the Americans seem less reliable, and views of the United States have deteriorated as a consequence of the unilateralism, the transactionalism, and the willingness to beat up on allies that have historically trusted the United States and cozy up to a lot of adversaries. But Katie, I would also be remiss if I didn't add that there is a view that Trump has sort of passed his maximum disruption sell-by date. And so the willingness of people like Maloney to hit back publicly, which they were not willing to do a year ago, comes because they understand that there is less impact from Trump's disruptive statements than there used to be. We saw this after Liberation Day and the tariffs, when the Chinese hit back, and then when the Supreme Court ruled against, and then when the markets take a hit and U.S. people get upset about affordability. We saw it after Trump goes after Iran and has to back down and doesn't take the oil and doesn't overturn the regime because he needs the Strait reopen. We saw it when Trump kicks Zelensky out of the White House, says he doesn't have the cards, and now today he sits down very comfortably with Zelensky in Ankara and praises him for actually fighting more effectively and says we're going to give you the licenses for the Patriot interceptors. Each of these things show significant limits and constraints on just how much Trump can disrupt in his favor and or in the favor of the United States. And that constraint, combined with a reality that the guy is 80 years old and is about to lose the House almost certainly, maybe the Senate in November, makes other leaders around the world start thinking about what's coming next, Democrat or Republican, that they don't have to worry as much about the latest utterance on Truth Social or at a summit that comes out of this president's mouth, especially because those utterances aren't necessarily going to lead to real effects. And I know it's harder to do that in the United States when it's, sort of full on 24/7 covering him with the headlines. But foreign leaders that I talk to when I travel around the world are starting, I would say, to calm down and recognize that they have actually more flexibility in how they deal with, how they address what they had considered to be the biggest driver of geopolitical uncertainty and danger for the last 2 years.
We saw it from the Spanish leader as well, shrugging off Donald Trump's threats to end all trade with Spain. He said countries don't trade, corporations, companies trade. He's not worried about it. I guess they're looking at the American landscape and seeing the American public increasingly fed up with Donald Trump, and maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Ian Bremmer, always good to have you, my friend. Thank you for joining us.